Part 275. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2746. And the battle ahead is raging. The emperor went up to a small three-story building, observed the battle ahead in the dark, and soon saw their gap, pointed to a place, and said, "Yin Li, you bring a group of people to go over the roof and go over there. When that clears up, their mouths can be opened." Yin Li glanced at it, then bowed in response, and turned to choose someone. Yin Li brought all the forbidden troops, and chose the best group to follow. It is not difficult for them to climb over the wall. The difficult thing is how to step on the roofs of several houses without finding out. Take out. After all, if it is discovered, arrows can shoot people to death. After Yin Li chose someone, he quietly touched the wall and jumped onto the roof in a few strokes. The guards behind the imperial guards followed one after another. Everyone lowered their bodies and squatted on the roof, sneaking forward quietly. The fighting was in full swing below, and there was a lot of movement, so no one noticed that there was movement on the roof as well. Yin Li tried his best to keep his movements light, and when he arrived at the place chosen by the emperor, he looked down and saw an arrow coming through the air. He didn't even think about it. Yin Li fell with the sword in his hand, and wiped the neck of the Goguryeo soldier who had turned his head to look at him before he could react. Behind him, the imperial army kept jumping down. Seeing that Yin Li and the others were discovered, the emperor narrowed his eyes slightly and ordered, "Let the archers come up and bring my bow too." Gu Zhong immediately bent over, and a team of archers came up not long after. The emperor also took his bow and arrow, pulled the bow and aimed at a building diagonally opposite. The arrow flew out, the opposite screamed, and the emperor nodded in satisfaction. Said to the archers, "Press them down and support Lord Yin." "Yes." The emperor then glanced over there for the last time, then turned and went downstairs. The emperor pulled the bow and arrow onto the horse, rushed directly to the front line, and followed the soldiers to kill the enemy. When the second prince of the high school came to boost his morale, when the morale of the other side was lifted, the emperor pouted, threw the bow and arrow to Gu Zhong, took his sword and stepped forward, shouting at the opposite side, "I'm here too, Gaoji, do you dare to fight me?" Zhao Qiuagong and Qi Baihe Li, who took the lead and rushed to the front, didn't have time to turn around to stop them, so they could only shout at the opposite side, "Why, Your Majesty, Gao Ji Xiao, I am Zhao Ji of the Great Jin Dynasty, do you dare to fight me? Qi Baihe Li, and me." The second high school prince didn't expect to meet the emperor of Dajin here, and he felt a little guilty for a while, and he didn't expect so many of them to propose to be one-on-one with him, and he felt even more guilty. Nisa immediately took a step forward and said, "This old man would like to discuss with Director Zhao for 1 or 2 lessons." It was considered that he had relieved the encirclement of the second-year high school prince. The soldiers on both sides ceased fighting and retreated behind their respective commanders. The knife in Zhao Qiuagong's hand was slightly tilted, and he smiled and said, "Okay, let's take a lesson." Qi Baihe Li stepped back in disappointment and stood in front of the emperor. The emperor pushed him on the shoulder and said, "No need to block." He stopped him from watching the battle. Qi Baihe Li did not let it go, and said without turning his head, "Your Majesty, safety is the most important thing." Nisa has already dismounted, holding a spear in his hand and stepping forward to face Zhao Qiuagong. The two of them look at each other, both of them are sharp, one drags the gun, and the other rushes towards the other. Bai Shan stood in front of the cell, opened his eyes, and asked softly, "Did you hear that?" Daji nodded, "I heard it, it was shouting and killing." The stone on Bai Shan's heart was completely put down, and the corner of his mouth was slightly raised, very happy. The head of the cell was also woken up. He couldn't sleep much tonight, so he was very angry for a while. Seeing Bai Shan standing at the door of the cell, he didn't care that he was his gold owner, so he knocked on his door with a stick and shouted, "I can't sleep tonight. If anyone makes any noise, I will pull them out of the dungeon and hang them up. Bai Shan smiled slightly and said, "It's almost dawn, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep." "What did you say?" the prisoner said angrily. "If it wasn't for you tossing around, would I not be able to sleep all night? It's still an hour before dawn, so let me lie down." Bai Shan thought about it, and felt that it was not too early. If it went well, he might see the second high school prince before dawn. So look at Daji. Daji took out 2 pearls from his purse and gave them to the prisoner, saying, "Our young master is not sleeping anymore, so prepare some food for our young master. We also need clean water and a handkerchief to wash." Prisoner. He really wanted to knock off the pearl in his hand, but in the end he reached out to take it, and hummed angrily, "Wait." The head of the cell only brought what they ordered, and there was nothing extra. Daji had no choice but to exchange a pearl for a comb and a pot of boiling water. After Bai Shan washed his face and put on his clothes, Daji combed his hair. After all this was over, the 2 of them ate slowly. At this time, Zhao Qiagong and Nisa also divided the winner. Zhao Qiagong's knife pierced through the ribs and seriously injured Nisa. The second prince of the high school had to let Nisa be brought back. The morale of the Jin army was high. The soldiers raised their swords and guns and shouted loudly. Zhao Qiagong, regardless of the injury, pointed the tip of the sword forward and said loudly, "Take the city of Ungshi and present it to your majesty, my sons, the time has come for you to make achievements." Everyone shouted kill and followed Zhao Qiagong to kill. Yin Li led the soldiers to fight against the Goguryeo soldiers in the alley, and directly killed all the defenders. Then he led the soldiers out of the alley, and turned to kill from the inside of the street. The second high school prince, who was retreating, was in an instant chaos. "I thought that I was blocked, but after a closer look, I found that there were only dozens of Jin troops, and I was relieved." He was about to kill people, but Chi Bai He Li had already brought people to meet him. He was brave and not afraid of death. He stepped on the wall and flew into the enemy army. Whose soldiers also rushed forward bravely and joined Yin Li. This one the mouth was torn open and could never be closed again. The second prince of the high school was escorted back to the council chamber in embarrassment. Seeing that Nisa had lost consciousness due to excessive blood loss, he could only hurriedly ask for a doctor. Mr. Meng had already made an appointment to ask someone to see him outside. As soon as he came back, he knelt down and said, "Prince, I beg the prince to have mercy on Ungshi Cheng." An official lay on the ground and cried bitterly, "Prince, we can't fight in Ungshi city anymore, it will turn into ruins." Fighting is not just about slashing with knives, but also with arrows. Sometimes, for certain purposes, the 2 armies will use rockets. It is night again, and torches are also needed for lighting. Once the houses in the city are on fire, it will be one after another. Even if the 2 armies have been restrained, there are many houses burned during this time. Master Meng took the opportunity to say, "Prince, isn't the Jin envoy still in our hands? Maybe he can say a word or two for us." The second high school prince thought of Bai Shan, and immediately got up and took down his sword from the shelf. After pulling it away, he strode to the dungeon. Seeing this, Mr. Meng's face changed greatly. He didn't expect that it would be counterproductive, so he quickly got up and followed, for fear that the second high school prince really cut Bai Shan. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2747. There wasn't even a table or chair in this room. Bai Shan really disliked it, so he looked at Daji again. Daegil looked at him silently, not moving. Bai Shan lowered his voice and said, "It's all His Majesty's stuff. We have to turn it in when we keep it back, so use it first." Daji was reluctant. "Master, if the sophomore prince doesn't come today, then we have to buy lunch and dinner. If we don't come tomorrow, we have to buy not only 3 meals a day, but also some tea and other things." We don't have that many pearls anymore. Bai Shan sighed, I would have known that I had brought more things before going out. However, he still insisted, in the end, I will buy a set of tables and chairs, so I can't have a place where guests don't sit when they come, right? Daji could only helplessly take out a pearl to the prisoner. The head of the prison was squatting not far away at the moment, and when he saw Daji touching his purse, he took the initiative to come up and asked with a smile, What do you want this time, my lord? Daji said, Bring us a set of tables and chairs. Prisoner, where can I get you a set of desks and chairs now? Why don't you just use it? Daji pointed to the table and chairs behind him and said, Bring in your set. The head of the prison looked back and didn't speak for a long time. Daji said, We will use it for a while, wait for the second prince to release our adults, and then you can move out. The head of the cell rolled his eyes and said, This is a table and chair for our own use, isn't one pearl enough? A single pearl can buy a whole room of tables and chairs, just your broken table and chair, that's all. You can change it if you like it, if you don't pull it down. I don't want to change it yet, Daji said and stuffed the pearl back. Purse. The head of the prison immediately said, Oh, don't worry, that's all, since the two of you are your country's envoys, it's just for you. So the head of the cell opened the cell door and let people bring their desks and chairs in, but instead of 4 chairs, they were given only 2, and they still had to sit on the rest. The prison head not only gave them tables and chairs, but also gave them the oil lamps on the table. He wiped the table with a linen cloth very intimately, and then took the pearl, looked at the light, and put it in with a smile. In his own pocket. The head of the cell exited the cell and then locked the cell again. As soon as he turned his head, he heard various noises coming from above, and the smile on his face fell. He took a stick and angrily wanted to go out to check the situation. The night is endless, isn't it? Why is it always so noisy? He turned around and was about to go up, and when he met the man who was rushing down in anger, his legs suddenly softened, and he knelt down on the ground. King, Prince. The second high school prince walked right in front of him, and with a glance, he saw Bai Shan who happened to be in the first cell. He immediately stepped forward, and the long sword in his hand slashed on the chain. Seeing that the slashing continued, he asked angrily, Where's the key? The prisoner who was kneeling on the ground immediately walked forward on his knees, crawled all the way to his feet, took off the key hanging from his waist with trembling hands, and offered it with both hands. Seeing that he was so stupid and bold, the second high school prince dared to let him open the door of the cell by himself. At this time, because of the failure of the front line, because of the persecution of the generals and officials, there seemed to be a fire burning in his heart, and his eyes glowed with red light, and he wanted to kill everyone he saw. Just when he was about to lose control of the irritability in his heart, a chuckle rang in his ear. The second high school prince turned his head grimly and looked into the cell. Bai Shan put down the teacup in his hand, got up and bowed to him with a smile, and said with a smile, Is the second prince here to see a certain? The second high school prince held the sword with bulging veins in his hand. Bai Shan suddenly withdrew the smile on his face, and said seriously to the second high school prince, The second prince is in his prime, do you really want to hang out with the royal court of Goguryeo for the rest of your life? He said, Even the fifth prince can judge the situation, why should the second prince be so obsessed with changing his identity? The second high school prince calmed down slowly, the anger in his heart was suppressed to the deepest bit by bit in Bai Shan's cold eyes. Seeing the clarity in his eyes restored, Bai Shan breathed a sigh of relief. He slowly stepped forward, reached out from the fence to take the key from the prison head, and then reached out to open the lock and took off the chain. Throwing it on the ground, he threw the key back to the jailer, opened the door and said with a sideways smile, Second prince, please. The head of the cell who caught the key. The second prince of the high school gave Bai Shan a deep look, then lifted his foot and entered the cell. Master Meng and the others arrived in a hurry. The crowd waited to see the second high school prince holding a sword and standing in the cell, while Bai Shan smiled and stood aside, not panicking, so they managed to suppress the panic, and hurriedly saluted and comforted, "Please calm down, prince." The second high school prince said coldly, "Get out." Crowd. The second prince of the high school directly instructed his personal guard, "Drive them out, and the envoy and I have something to talk about alone." The guards took the soldiers and threw the people out. I don't know if the head of the cell was originally the person in this cell, and the other yamen were also kneeling, so the guards didn't chase them away. Bai Shan picked up the teapot and poured a cup of boiled water for the second-year high school prince, probed the back of the pot with the back of his hand, and smiled slightly. "It's still warm, although it is white water. It is the best thing that a certain can come up with now. Please ask the second-year high school prince not to dislike." Bai Shan put the teacup in front of him. The second high school prince lowered his eyes, put the sword on the table, and drank the glass of white water. He turned the teacup in his hand, and the anxiety in his heart almost overflowed. Bai Shan seemed to know his torment, and fell silent, giving him enough time to think, and when he was almost tangled, he said, "Why should the second prince struggle for a moment? It is so big, and many are opportunities to make achievements and make a name for it in history. How can it be the same? He is the second prince of Goguryeo. With his power in the country, he is more suitable for this position than the boss, and after the surrender." Seeing that he was still so hesitant, Bai Shan frowned and said, "My Dejin's general manager Feng De has already led a team of soldiers and horses to besiege the inner city. Now the fifth prince should have returned to the inner city earlier, and the second prince can receive it. The official document of the fifth prince." The second prince's face turned pale. If the father really killed the fifth, in order to deter all those who wanted to surrender, he should have announced it to the whole country, but he has never received any news from the inner city. Seeing this, Bai Shan smiled slightly, lowered his voice and said, "Second prince, you were the second prince when Goguryeo was here. If the royal court was not there, would you still be the second prince?" The second prince of the high school clenched his palms tightly, and Bai Shan said, "What's more, most of the city of Ungshi is now in the hands of Dajin. The second prince should understand in his heart that you can't defend the city, and you have to take the remaining 60,000 soldiers to die. City." The second prince of high school bent his back, closed his eyes and opened it to look at Bai Shan. "What can you give me?" Bai Shan smiled slightly, and secretly said in his heart, "It's done. See you tomorrow." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2748. Bai Shan and the second prince of high school came out of the dungeon together, and the people who were anxiously waiting outside saw the two coming out together, and their eyes were on the hands they were holding. Bai Shan looked at the second high school prince, and the second high school prince stepped forward and said solemnly, "Where are the guards?" The guards who had quietly come out to transfer troops just now brought people forward and surrounded the crowd. The second high school prince said with a cold face, "This king has already decided to ask to surrender. You can go to the front line with me." Naturally, it was in the past that they had all put down their weapons. Obviously, the second prince of high school was also afraid that someone would not surrender and turn against him. The second prince of high school went to the front line with Bai Shan when he was ready. At this time, it was just dawn, and the front line had just ended a wave of rushing and killing, and the two sides were truce and rest. The emperor is also considering whether to continue fighting for a while, or to withdraw troops and wait for Bai Shan to operate over there. Then a scout shouted with sharp eyes, "Master Bai is back." As soon as the emperor heard this, he immediately took the people out, raised his feet to go to the front line, and was stopped by Chi Li. "Your Majesty, if it is bright today, there are many houses in the city, with different heights, no one knows whether it is in the dark. There are archers in ambush, please stay here, the last will go to investigate." Zhao Qiuagong, who was healing inside, also hurriedly shouted, "Yes, Your Majesty, we are waiting here, you must not walk around. This area has just been knocked down and hasn't been cleaned up yet. I don't know if there are archers in ambush. Now that it's dawn, you can't walk around." Zhao Qiuagong made a hiss and urged Zhou Man, who was stitching needles on his back, "Master Zhou, didn't you hear? Master Bai is back, you quickly wrap me up and go find him." Man Bao pressed his head and told him to be honest, "You don't move, the speed is still very fast." Man Bao flew the needle, and at the other end of the street, Bai Shan and the second prince of the high school rode side by side, crossing the people on both sides of the street and slowly walking towards the boundary line of the battle. Behind him were Goguryu's generals and Shuigui, who had been recalled, and the entire embassy returned to Bai Shan's hands. When they reached the front line, Bai Shan and the second high prince nodded slightly and then took Shuigui and Daji across the border back to Dajin. He did not dismount, and directly said to Chi Li, "The second high prince is willing to surrender on behalf of Shi Cheng." Chi Li glanced over at the second high prince and asked Bai Shan in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Bai Shan nodded. Chi Li said, "Wait, I'll go and invite your majesty." As soon as the emperor heard that Shi Cheng had finally surrendered, his eyes lit up, and he immediately got up and said, "Go, go and accept the surrender." Man Bao reluctantly sprinkled Zhao Qiuagong with medicinal powder and bandaged it. He didn't tie the bandages and ran out in his clothes. He stopped the emperor and said, "Your Majesty, you can't take risks, let me do it later." Chi Li also said, "Yes, what if it is a trap?" The emperor pushed their hands away and said, "What are you afraid of? I still have the courage, and you are vegetarians when you are the Yin Li and the imperial army." Yin Li, who came after hearing the news. As soon as the emperor saw him, he greeted, "Quick, we will find all the good-looking and spiritual guards of the imperial guard, and we will pick them up." Yin Li responded with a sound and turned around to dispatch troops. "What looks good-looking and spiritual, just pick some and put them in front, and the rest must have high force value and cleverness." The emperor also sorted out his armor, and after confirming that he was in good spirits, he pulled his BMW with a smile, and when the forbidden army arrived, he took everyone to pick it up. Man Bao wanted to see Bai Shan, so he pulled his horse and ran along with him. As soon as Bai Erlang saw it, how could he miss it? He took off the cloak on his body, put it on a wounded soldier, and followed him on a horse. Bai Shan waited at the boundary line, occasionally turning around and comforting Chang Gaoji with a smile. The emperor came forward with a mighty imperial army. Bai Shan hurriedly dismounted and saluted, knelt on the ground and said, "Your Majesty, the second prince of Goguryeo, Gao's Hiwi, will surrender to the city of Ungshi. After that, I present the surrender book I just wrote." The corners of the emperor's mouth twitched slightly, but he pressed it hard, nodding with a majestic look on his face. The imperial army stepped forward to receive the surrender letter and presented it to the emperor. After reading it, the emperor said yes aloud twice, accepting Gao Zi's surrender letter. Bai Shan got the letter of approval, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he turned back to look for Gao Zi. "Your Majesty is here, the second prince of the high school, please." Gao Zi took a deep breath, took a deep look at Bai Shan before dismounting, and Bai Shan crossed the border to the emperor's horse under the watchful eyes of the soldiers of the two armies. Then, suppressing the tears in his eyes, he said with a little choked sobs, "Goguryeo Gao volunteered to lead the army and civilians of Banghung down to His Majesty." The emperor dismounted, took 3 steps and stepped forward to support Gao Zi, patted his hand and said, "I know the heart of Iking, Gao Iking, rest assured, Goguryeo is my country, and my love for the people is not under the royal court of the Gao family, I will treat the people of Ungshi well. Gao Ji was about to kneel again. This minister is guilty. The emperor hurriedly grabbed him and said gently, "What's wrong with Iking? Since today has been surrendered, from now on, I will be the people of Jinjin, my subjects. All the past has become the past, whether it is no matter what kind of enmity, you can't mention it again." Gao Ji lowered his head. Yes. The soldiers behind him breathed a sigh of relief. They were fighting each other just now, but now they are one family. To be honest, they were really scared. The emperor looked at Zhao Qiuagong. Zhao Qiuagong understood, and immediately led the generals on this side to step forward with a smile to hand over to the generals on the Goguryeo side, and took over all the troops and horses in their hands. The emperor took Gao Ji's hand and went to a house very intimately. He smiled and said, "I will stay here temporarily, and I will take Iking to the camp on the west side of the city for a while." Man Bao lowered his head and turned to give way to them. When they passed, he rushed to Bai Shan's side, looked him up and down, and when he saw that he was still clean, he asked, "Aren't you hurt?" Bai Shan shook his head. Seeing that there was blood on her body, he asked, "Are you tired?" Man Bao said, "Fortunately, the war is over now, so there will be no more new casualties. I will deal with a few more and it will be finished." Bai Erlang said, "She's not as tired as me. I'm a mover up and down, and I work hard." The emperor pulled Gao Ji to speak, and when he entered the door, he remembered the great hero of the strip. When he turned around, he saw the three of them gathered together and whispered quietly. The emperor called out, "Zhou Qing, have all your wounded been dealt with?" He asked Bai Erlang again, "Bai Hanlin, how are you going to arrange the wounded in your medical account for a while, if you don't deal with them?" The two immediately saluted and then slipped away. The emperor smiled at Bai Shan and waved gently, "Bai Qing, come quickly." Bai Shan smiled and stepped forward. Seeing that he was calm and clean, the emperor obviously made himself a good life even in prison. The emperor was very satisfied and happy, so he took his hand and said to Gao Ji, "Gao Iking has only entered the great Jin dynasty, and he is very grateful to the camp. I don't know much about the situation in China, so you take him with you." Bai Shan's heart moved, and he replied yes with a smile. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2749. The emperor's heart was very dark. After pulling Gao Ji to comfort him, he asked Bai Shan to lead him to meet the generals. As soon as they left, the smile on his face was faint, and he turned his head and said to Guzhong, "Where's the Duke of Zhao? Please come over. Didn't you see Qi Bai Li and the others chatting with Gao Ji outside?" Guzhong bowed slightly and said, "Go back to your majesty, Grandpa Guo is healing." Emperor. He simply got up to look and saw that he was sitting on a small stool with his upper body naked. There was already a wounded soldier on the wooden bed he was lying on before, and Zhou Liru was rescuing him. Man Bao was remedicating Zhao Qiuagong. After bandaging, he tied the belt and said to him, "The depth is only about 1.5 inches, and the rest are superficial wounds." It stopped bleeding. She said, "You must drink the medicine that is boiled for you. The medicine that stops bleeding and builds muscle can make you feel better faster." She looked up to see the emperor, and because it was inconvenient to have medicine in her hands, she bent slightly. The emperor waved his hand indifferently and let her continue to work. Man Bao went to see the students to rescue the injured, and occasionally gave pointers to help, but he was also very busy. Zhao Qiuagong was about to stand up and salute, but was stopped by the emperor's shoulders. He tooted his tongue and said with a smile, "Brother has done a great job this time." Zhao Qiuagong's black and red face smiled and said, "This is all blessed by His Majesty's wisdom and ancestors." He said, "Although this Nasa in Goguryeo is old, his kung fu is really good. If he were 2 years younger, the minister would not be able to beat him. Zhao Qiagong's injuries were all caused by the fight with Nisa, but he was able to calmly follow people to fight until the end before coming back to Zhou Man for treatment. Speaking of Emperor Lusa, he remembered, he frowned slightly and said, "This person is more important than Gao Ji. He is not among the people who should be surrendered. I don't know if he is dead or not." The emperor couldn't sit still for a while, and immediately turned his head and instructed Guzhong, "Go and find the descending generals from Koguryo, and ask them if Nisa is dead. If not, immediately invite people here." After thinking about the inaccuracy of this order, he said, "If the injury is serious, then bring it here for treatment." Guzhong responded and came back after a long time, "Your Majesty, I heard that people are still alive, and their doctor has been treating them, you see. The injured person, especially the bleeding patient, should not move." The emperor got up, "I will visit him in person." Zhao Qiagong stared. Guzhong hurriedly persuaded, "Your Majesty, the place has not been cleaned up yet, and the Nisa is located in the deep south of the city. I have heard that this Nisa has always disagreed with the second High Prince's surrender, and now he is afraid that he has never thought of it. Obedience, you go to visit at this time, if he is not dead." Zhao Qiagong nodded again, and couldn't help but look back, sweating on his forehead. It would be fine if Bai Shan was not there. Why wasn't Yin Li here? He couldn't stop the emperor. The emperor said, "It's enough for someone to enter in advance, I will delay one step." He added, "Call Zhou Man and let her bring the best medicine." Guzhong couldn't help it, so he asked people to call Zhou Man and quietly informed Yin Li. Upon hearing this, Yin Li thought for a while and went to Bai Shan. After a while, they brought Gao Ji, Yuan Yi, and others over. Goguryu's officers and ministers who can speak here have been called over. Since we are going to visit Nisa, then we can all be together. If someone dares to harm the emperor, the imperial army can cut these people to the sword with one knife. If you want to die, let's go together. Gao Ji, who knew nothing about this, and the monarchs and ministers from the Dajin side went to Nisa's house together. The door was wide open, and there was no gatekeeper. As soon as you entered the yard, it was empty, as if there was no one there. Gao Ji frowned slightly, "Where have all the servants in the family gone?" The emperor also looked around curiously, but Yin Li and Bai Shan looked at the empty house thoughtfully. Going straight forward, the imperial army entered the backyard first, and soon came up to report, "Your Majesty, everyone is in the backyard." It was said to be a backyard, but it was actually just a small yard. There were a few people standing in the yard. One of them was a middle-aged man who was confronting the forbidden army. When he saw the person walking in, he almost pulled out his sword. The second high school prince at the back, he was stunned, obviously not knowing the situation for a while. "Moun, don't wait to meet the Emperor of Jin." Moun's expression changed, and he looked at the second high school prince and asked, "The prince has descended?" Apparently he didn't get the message. The second high school prince's face was not very good looking, but he still said as plainly as possible in the eyes of everyone, "For the sake of the people and soldiers of the city, and for the city of Ungshi to no longer be destroyed, this prince has surrendered." Moun's hand holding the hilt of the sword loosened slightly, his face was blue and white, and finally he closed the sword, looking at the Emperor of Dejin with tears in his eyes, and also at the imperial guards who rushed into the yard to be on guard. Soft, knelt on the ground, bowed his head deeply to the emperor, "I beg your majesty to let my father go, now his life is in danger, and he doesn't know anything." Only then did the emperor know that this was Nisa's son. He hurriedly stepped forward to help Moun up. Yin Li stepped forward first, lifted Moun up with both hands, and glanced at the sword he placed beside him. After picking up the man, he held the sword and smiled at Moun, who looked up at him. "Mo Lang Jun, this sword will be put away for you first." Moun's hand holding the sword refused to let go for a while, and he and Yin Li looked at each other for a long time before slowly letting go. Yin Li took his sword, turned around and handed it to a guard of the Forbidden Army, and then retreated behind the emperor. The emperor asked with concern, "Is Nisa seriously injured?" Mon lowered his head and said, "Yes." There was an exclamation from the room, and a servant ran out. He didn't care to see the extra people in the courtyard. He knelt down beside Mon's leg and cried, "Master, Master is going to die." Mon's face changed, and he immediately turned around and ran inside. The emperor frowned slightly, raised his feet to keep up, but was stopped by Yin Li. The emperor was helpless and could only say, "Zhou Man, hurry up and save people." Man Bao waited for his orders, and immediately picked up the medicine box and wanted to go in. Bai Shan quickly reached out and grabbed the medicine box and went in. Yin Li gave the two guards a wink, and the two guards chased after them, stepping into the room first. There were a little more people in the room, but they were all servants and doctors, and they looked normal. The two calmly looked at the furnishings and arrangements in the house and confirmed that there was nothing wrong, and after Master Zhou and Master Bai were also safe, they went out to report. The emperor brought people in. Man Bao pulled away the servants who were crying bitterly in front of the bed, glanced at the people on the bed, frowned slightly, turned his head and asked the two doctors, "Did the bleeding stop?" The two doctors glanced at her, unable to hold her identity, and could only vaguely answer "yeah." Man Bao looked at them with a frown, and seeing that they didn't want to talk more, he pushed Mon, who was crying bitterly, grabbing his father's hand, grabbed Nisa's hand, and felt his pulse. Well, almost no pulse. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2750. Man Bao glanced at the stab wound that had penetrated under his ribs and frowned slightly. It had been so long, did they even think about sutures to stop the bleeding? She opened the medicine box, took out the silver needle and came out to protect his heart pulse. She didn't care to stop the bleeding, and constantly stimulated his heart with the silver needle. She listened carefully, but still could not hear the pulse. He fixed the silver needle, put his hand on his chest, and after finding the right position, he knelt on the bed and pressed. Mon stared blankly and asked, "What are you doing?" The two doctors were also startled, and they stepped forward to stop them. "Nisa has passed away, how can you insult Nisa like this?" As soon as Yin Li waved his hand, the guard stepped forward and dragged the doctor who was about to rush up, and even Mon was dragged over. Mon struggled vigorously and shouted, "Let go of my father, let go of my father, you can't insult him like this, you can't insult him like this." Unable to break free, he felt great sadness in his heart, and turned to look at the second high school prince behind the emperor, with tears streaming down his face. "Second prince, are you just watching them insulting my father like this?" Bai Shan, who gave Man Baogang the hand, couldn't help but said, "She's saving him." Master Fang also quickly helped to persuade him, "Young Master Mo has misunderstood. Master Zhou is one of the best medical doctors in Arjin State Imperial Hospital. She is saving Nisa." Mon didn't believe it at all. This person looked like a woman, what kind of adult? The two doctors on the side also said, "Luisa has lost his breath, let him go in peace." Man Bao ignored them and continued to press on Nisa's chest. Bai Shan squeezed his nose and gave him artificial respiration with a look of disgust. Crowd. Half an hour later, Man Bao listened to the other person's heart, felt the pulse, took out the silver needle, changed the needle method, and inserted a needle into his person. Nisa was in severe pain, her feet shook slightly, and she slowly opened her eyes. Mon, who was about to cry to death. He looked at his revived father with tears and snot, but did not respond for a while. Man Bao pushed Bai Shan away, swept away the hemostatic medicine on his body bit by bit, checked it, and then began to clean the wound. Bai Shan took out the needle and thread from the medicine box, led the thread to her, and handed it to her. Man Bao took it, lowered his head and sutured. While reading the prescription, he said to Bai Shan, "Let them take the medicine according to the prescription, and bring it over immediately." Bai Shan wrote it down and handed it down to the dazed Mon, "Young Master Mo, let's go get the medicine." Only then did Mon react, and after wiping his face, he quickly got up and rushed out. "Wait a minute," Man Bao turned his head to stop him and asked, "Do you have any good ginseng at home? If so, take a few slices for him to contain, to replenish his qi." Yes, 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 the ginseng was in the room. They had only used it for Nisa before, and a doctor immediately cut 2 pieces and brought them back. Man Bao couldn't help but stunned. "It is an excellent ginseng. Just smelling it makes me feel so good." She motioned for the doctor to put ginseng into Nisa's mouth and lowered her head to continue to treat his wound. Nisa seemed to come back to her senses now, looked at Zhou Man and asked, "Are you the goddess doctor of Jin?" Man Bao felt that his words were much better than his son's, so he raised his head and smiled at him. Nisa's heart sank and asked, "Why is the Jin's genius doctor in my house?" The emperor did not step forward, but turned his head to look at the second high prince, nodded with him, and went out. The second high school prince came out. The emperor frowned slightly, and said to him, "The old general is seriously injured at this time. It is not easy to stimulate him. I will leave Zhou Qing here, and let her treat the old general well, and you also want to be kind to Zhou Qing." The second prince of the high school gave up, and all the subordinate generals and ministers behind him were moved, and they knelt down and said, "Your Majesty is kind and generous." The second high school prince also knelt down and bowed. The emperor nodded, and then left with the people. The forbidden army brought by Yin Li took advantage of the situation and left apart to take over the entire Mo family. Outside, the Jin army was also taking over the entire city of Ungshi. Bai Shan hesitated for a while, but Gu Zhong's little maid kept urging him again and again. He got up and left, and Bai Er was about to leave behind him, but Bai Shan pushed him back. "You are the person from the medical account, why do you follow me? Follow Man Bao." "Bai Erlang, this is a medical treatment, what is he doing here?" But after glancing at Bai Shan, he still stopped, pouted, and returned to Zhou Man's side. Bai Shan was relieved, and after going out, he first found water to rinse his mouth, and then went after the emperor. Mon brought the medicine up, and Nisa was carried and sat up. After barely eating 2 spoonfuls, he asked him, "Ongshi Chang, is it down?" Mon lowered his eyes, and after a while, he choked out, "It's down." Nisa slightly turned his head away and did not want to drink any more medicine. Man Bao frowned slightly when he saw it, and said to him, "Your injury is very serious and you have lost a lot of blood. If you don't follow the doctor's advice, I'm afraid you won't survive for a few days." Nisa said with an expressionless face, "There is a magic doctor, Mon, send the magic doctor out." Man Bao raised his eyebrows, turned to look at the 2 doctors, and then went out with the medicine box. The 2 doctors looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and went out. Man Bao and Bai Erlang stood in the yard with their medicine boxes and waited for them. Man Bao said, "The patient is not cooperating, and I am instructed to consult the doctor, so the subsequent treatment will have to trouble you." She said, "Every time after my consultation, you will have to pierce the needle and apply the medicine, and I will prescribe it for you." The 2 doctors looked at each other, and one of them blushed and said, "Sir, we don't know how to do acupuncture." Man Bao was stunned for a moment and then said, "It doesn't matter, just recognize the acupuncture points, and I will write down the acupuncture method in detail." Both of them blushed. "I don't recognize many acupuncture points." Man Bao asked, "It's okay, as long as you know the 3 yin meridians of the hand and the 3 yin meridians of the foot." Dr. Su hesitated for a while and then asked, Which 3 yin meridians of the hand refer to? The 3 yin meridians of the foot correspond to the 3 yin meridians of the hand. Man Bao, the 3 yin meridians of the hand are the lung meridian of the hand Taiyin, the pericardium meridian of the hand Shuiyin, and the heart meridian of the hand Shaiyin. This patient lost too much blood and was injured under the heart and lungs, among which. Seeing their confused faces, Man Bao sighed and said, "Forget it, even if he doesn't want to, I'll try to puncture him as much as possible." But the patient is unwilling to cooperate, which is really troublesome. Man Bao just sat on the stone bench in the yard and waited for Moun. He got a little impatient waiting for her, so he asked the 2 doctors who didn't care, "Is there a family member of the Yuan son?" Dr. Su was still thinking about his thoughts, and he said unintentionally, "Nisa has 4 sons and 7 grandsons, and the descendants are very prosperous." Man Bao glanced at the empty courtyard and sighed, as expected, "My parents are right, Zhang is still old and hot." Read more on the Reading Festival. See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2751. Bai Erlang also glanced at the guards guarding the gate of the courtyard, nodded and said, "But how could he bear to keep young Master Yuan? Isn't this death in vain? If it weren't for our Majesty's kindness, this would be death in vain." Man Bao thought for a while and said, "Stay here just in case, will you collect the corpse then?" Bai Erlang, "It's filial, but if it were me, I would definitely not let him accompany him. If I can live, I will live. Anyway, I will die. How much difference does it make if it becomes a handful of dirt or a complete corpse? The most important thing is to live." The 2 doctors returned to their senses and shivered when they heard their words. Seeing the sweat on the foreheads of the 2, Bai Erlang reassured them, "Don't be afraid, our Majesty is very kind. You see, even Nisa, who has been refusing to surrender, has sent an imperial physician to treat him, let alone you." The 2 wiped the sweat from their foreheads and responded with a forced smile. I don't know what the father and son said inside, but Moun finally came out with red eyes, thanked Zhou Man for his diagnosis and treatment, and said, "My father is stubborn, and I ask Master Zhou to be tolerant, and then my father's diagnosis and treatment will be handed over to Su. Doctor and them, there is Lord Laozhou." After saying that, he touched his body, and it seemed that there was nothing he could get his hands on, so he took off the jade pendant hanging from his waist and stuffed it into Zhou Man's hand. Man Bao glanced at the jade pendant in his hand, and said to Moun with a serious face, "I will try my best to treat Lusa even for this jade pendant, don't worry." Moun, he didn't mean that. Man Bao was already reluctant to listen to his explanation, so he directly told him, "I want to drink the prescribed medicine, you can make any excuses, say I didn't prescribe it, I will leave him the medicine powder for hemostasis and muscle growth, tomorrow morning. Change his medicine." He added, "As for the acupuncture, I will show him tomorrow. If he is willing to cooperate, it will be the best. If he is not willing, I will come a quarter of an hour after he has finished taking the medicine. Remember not to be with him at this quarter of an hour. Speak and let him lie down and sleep." Moun, "My father will fall asleep. There is a tranquilizer in the medicine, and it's easy to feel sleepy after eating and drinking enough." Man Bao said, "I can still put him to sleep, but unfortunately I can't consult a doctor. This can only be done. Please too." Man Bao said and turned around and gestured to Dr. Su. The 2 immediately returned to their senses and immediately said that there was no problem. They also wanted to ask about the acupoints, but there were still many wounded waiting behind Man Bao, and they didn't want to spend a lot of time here, so they left after telling them. The 2 doctors watched her back disappear with regret. Jin State's medical skills are really powerful, Just a woman, so young, her medical skills are already better than ours. Moun on the side, she is a famous doctor in Jin. The two doctors were a little embarrassed. They were only circling in Ungshi city, and they didn't know the news of the outside world, so they didn't know this. Now that the entire city of Ungshi belonged to the Jin army, the emperor moved directly into the council chamber, and Manbeo and his tents naturally followed. When she was busy all day and dragged her tired body back to her newly assigned residence, Bai Shan was still in the council chamber and did not come back. He seemed busier than she was. Bai Shan is of course busy. The Jin army is going to take over the military affairs of Ungshi Cheng, and they are going to take over the government affairs of Ungshi Cheng. The emperor decided to set up the Andong Duhufu here, and temporarily set up the Duhufu in Ungshi city. Naturally, the military and government affairs of the Duhufu must be sent to take over, but before people come, these things also need people. Deal with. While Bai Shan and Lord Fang had to deal with some government affairs, they also had to investigate the background of the surrendered local officials, and screened out suitable candidates for the emperor and the generals and ministers to take over temporarily. We must also appease the people, raise food and grass locally, and deal with captives. Of course, they didn't do these things, but the documents were all sent to them. They needed to review and hand them over to the emperor, and sometimes the emperor would ask them about politics. Wei Ji and others were not there, so the two of them were placed in front of them as Zhongsha province. When asked, they had to answer, otherwise it would be too much of a loss. Therefore, they need to understand all aspects, but they are busy. But being so busy, Bai Shan still had to take the notebook to attend the small court meeting, and listen to the emperor and the generals discussing where and how to fight next. Bai Shan had already made some psychological preparations, so the emperor wanted to express his importance to the second prince of high school. He not only named him the general of Fudong, but also asked him to lead 40,000 troops, including 20,000 soldiers from Goguryeo and 20,000 soldiers from Jin. The emperor said, "Who do you want to send to be his deputy?" The generals looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Niu Shishi felt a little resentful in his heart. "Does your majesty love him too much? Gao Ji is not a great general, he can defend Ungshi city for so long, one is relying on heavy troops, and the other is relying on the benefits of defending the city. If he were replaced, he would be able to defend for 2 months, so that the Jin army could not be beaten down with snow and had to turn around." Therefore, although the surrender of the other party was a good thing, Niu Shishi actually looked down on the other party in his heart. The emperor seemed to know what he was thinking, and said indifferently, "Qin Tianjian said that it may snow in a few days." When the emperor went on an expedition, the officials accompanying him had everything, so Qin Tianjian naturally sent officials to accompany him. When everyone heard this, they sat up slightly. The emperor said, "Let Gao Ji lead people to attack the city, all the way east and south, I don't care whether he is coaxing or attacking, in short, the army must reach the inner city before the snow falls." Bai Shan raised his eyes slightly, and when he saw many people frowning, he knew that they were worried. After all, Gao Ji was a general, and it was very dangerous to bring so many soldiers and horses, so he stood up and said, "Your Majesty, there has never been any news about Feng Shangju, and the news of Master Zhang has not been sent back." The emperor and the crowd said, "Feng Liang's lone army goes deep, and the food and grass cannot be delivered. We must meet them before the snow falls." He didn't want to leave the army all the way inside. Feng Liang was a good minister, and there were a lot of generals who followed him. There were so many people from the imperial physician's office and soldiers. It was impossible for the emperor to give up on them. Ungshi Cheng has been captured, and the situation is very beneficial to them, so it is time to pursue the victory. Zhao Qiuagong thought about it for a long time. Although this move entails great risks, the benefits are also great, so he bowed and said, "Your Majesty is wise. The emperor asked him, "Who do you think should be his deputy?" Zhao Qiuagong pondered, "Ashina and Qi Bai Li are definitely not good, they are too senior, not only will they feel uncomfortable if they are sent there, but Gao Ji is afraid to think too much. Niu Shishi is suitable, but listening to his voice, he is very displeased with the second high school prince. The conflict between the chief general and the lieutenant general of the First Army is very unfavorable for the current situation, so he is not suitable." Zhao Qiuagong frowned and pondered. Bai Shan bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesty, I have a choice for this minister. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2752. Emperor, "Oh, who is it?" Bai Shan smiled and said, "It is very suitable for Shui Gixu, who is accompanying the minister on the mission, to join the army." Shui Gui was only a general flag before, because he was wearing a white robe and rushed into the enemy, so brave, the emperor noticed him. At that time, after the First World War, the emperor gave him a horse and some silk, satin, pearls and other items, and led his general to hear the sound. The leader came to support General Ashina. After coming down the strip, his military merit is already enough to be a general, but if it is a lieutenant general, it is still far behind. Shui Bei had fought with Qi Bai and He Li for many years, and now he was only a lieutenant. But now is not the time to pay attention to this kind of rules. If Shui Gui really has the ability, he can be admitted by exception, and he will return after the war. This is also the state of wartime. The emperor pondered for a moment, and hesitated. He is more than brave, but he doesn't know how to use his scheming methods. After all, Gao Ji was a general, so he had to find someone with a smarter mind. The emperor hesitated because he didn't know if Shui Gui had any brains. Bai Shan said to the emperor with certainty, "Your Majesty, General Shuiken is not only brave and strong in martial arts, but also a cautious person, brave and resourceful, but not very experienced. Most suitable." Qi Bai Li turned his head and asked him, "How do you know he is brave and resourceful?" Bai Shandao, although Xiaoguan has only worked with him for 5 days, he is somewhat familiar with each other day and night. General Ashina, who had been silent all the time, also said, "Your Majesty, Shui Gui is indeed a man of strategy, and his scheming is not shallow." The emperor finally made a decision, "Okay, then let Shui Gui go, hold a celebration banquet tonight, count the provisions and troops tomorrow, and let them set off early the next morning." Everyone got up, and Chi responded with a yes. Shui Gui didn't expect surprises to fall from the sky, and when he knew it was Bai Shan who recommended him, he turned to look for him, wanting to thank him in person. He looked all the way, and saw that not far from the main tent, Bai Shanzheng and Zhou Man were standing face to face. Bai Shanzheng stretched out his hand to take a strand of hair scattered on her head to the back, took off the hairpin and tucked her hair again. "Shui Gui." He stopped, scratched his face and turned to leave. "Forget it, I'll find Master Bai tomorrow to thank him." Bai Shan made her hair, and then said, "So Lusa doesn't want to treat her disease?" Man Bao nodded. "He is already very old. He has suffered such a serious injury, and his recovery ability is not as good as that of a young adult. Even if he takes good medicine, he may not be able to survive. No matter how negative he is, I am afraid that he will not live for long." Bai Shan saw Gu Zhong, who was looking left and right, and when he saw them, he walked over with a smile on his face. "Don't get yourself into trouble if you can't be saved in the end." Man Bao nodded and saw Gu Zhong. "Then I'll go, I've already washed up, you ask the cake to make hot water for you." "Bai Shan, have you eaten yet?" "I have eaten it, and I don't know if you have eaten it or not." "I will let the Western cake warm the soup on the small stove. If you don't eat it, let the Western cake give you a bowl of noodle soup." Bai Shan responded. Gu Zhong came forward, saluted and said with a smile, "Master Zhou, your Majesty wants to see you." As Man Bao walked with him, he smiled and said, "Just let someone call you, why did you come here in person?" Gu Zhong smiled and said, "Your Majesty is having dinner, and our family has nothing to do for a while, so we walk around." The emperor was hungry, and he was going to have a celebratory banquet in the evening, but it would take at least an hour or more before the banquet was held, so he couldn't help but ate noodles, a bowl of noodles, and a plate of pickles in front of him, but he still asked Zhou Man, "Has Zhou Qing eaten?" Used. The emperor did not invite her to eat together, and asked, "How is Mornaza?" Man Bao told the truth. The emperor frowned, and sighed after a while, "It's a loyal person, it's a pity." Man Bao also felt a pity, so she asked directly, "Your Majesty, will I continue to go?" "Go ahead," said the emperor, "in addition to treating the disease, let's unravel him more. If he doesn't want to surrender, I won't force him, as long as he stays in Ungshi city." He said, "It's best if he can survive." Although their positions were different, the emperor did appreciate Nasa. Compared to Gaoji, Nasa is more useful. It's a pity. It's a pity that the other party is not used by him, and he is injured at this time, making it difficult for him to use it. Not without benefits though. The emperor opened the treasury of the council, selected several precious medicinal materials and sent them to Nuasa. The rest, he left some precious ones, and the rest were handed over to Bai Erlang. Bai Erlang pulled it all into the medical account, and directly recorded it in a book. He also made a book of ginseng and Ganoderma, so that those who wanted to draw the spoils did not even have a chance to speak. General Ashina was very satisfied with this. These spoils belonged to the treasury. Even the emperor couldn't help but say to Guzhong, "The concubine can't do anything else, but this one is very suitable." Guzhong said with a smile, "This is also because of His Majesty's backing, and the concubine's pure and kind heart, both of which are indispensable." The emperor was very happy to be complimented, stroked his beard and smiled. At the evening celebration banquet, Gao Ji was placed in the first seat on the right hand of the emperor, and the first seat on the left hand was Zhao Qiagong. Man Bao was a few tables behind. This time, she was sitting with Imperial Dr. Lu, opposite Bai Shan and Lord Fang. Bai Erlang was placed next to Gao Ji, and the person who arranged the seats was thinking, "What?" In addition to Gao Ji, the generals who followed Gao Ji surrendered this time, and even some big families have positions. The emperor also specially summoned the father and son of the Meng family. After a day of understanding, the emperor directly asked Mr. Meng to temporarily take charge of the specific government affairs of Ungshi Cheng. He said, "The people are frightened, and the top priority is to appease the people and restore people's livelihood." The subordinate generals and subordinate ministers stared blankly at the excited Master Meng, and he answered with a loud yes, saying that he would definitely work hard to manage Ungshi Cheng well. The emperor smiled and nodded. For the conquered cities, control is important, but stability is equally important. Only with stability can the local people identify with Jin and their Li royal family, and can achieve long-term stability. To this end, he did not mind using the local nobility. Although the power of control will be weakened, there will be deceived and calculated, but there will be a smooth transition in the local area. For the people, what they need most is stability, not turbulence. The emperor poured a glass of wine and smiled at Master Meng. "Ungshi Cheng will be entrusted to Iking." Well, a key official has settled down again. Gao Ji frowned slightly and glanced at his confidants. He didn't want to hand over Anshishan to Master Meng, and he cared more about his team. But at this time, he was no longer in charge, and the emperor scattered the people he brought directly. Some were assigned to other armies, or went to other cities to serve as officials, and most of them still followed him. The emperor does not seem to be afraid that he will form a party for personal gain. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2753. Of course the emperor was not afraid anymore. He also thought that after Gao Ji took these famous families and captured the remaining cities all the way, it would be best to have a safe journey. He would try to find a way to settle them. Will not begrudge tears. These people are bugs to Goguryeo and the state of Jin. They are disgusting, but they are also useful. If they are crushed to death, they will not only get dirty feet, but also have little benefit. It is best to let them consume on the battlefield. Zhao Qiuagong and even Bai Shan could clearly understand the meaning of the emperor, so before falling asleep at night, Bai Shan whispered to Man Bao, "Your Majesty obviously wants to make the best use of Gao's Haiwu. Still don't like it, don't appreciate it. The emperor has always protected more than exploited those he likes and admires. His Majesty is so eager to send him out now, obviously because of his good fortune." Bai Shan said, "If his luck is good, he won't be bad for a marquis after the eastern expedition. If his luck is not good, he will only have a few comments from his Majesty." Man Bao said, "It's a pity Nasa, if it were him, maybe he would be able to seize this opportunity." Luce's condition deteriorated rapidly. Even though Manbao went to give him needles and dressings every day, he obviously did not cooperate with the treatment, as can be seen from his pulse. Therefore, within 2 days, people became groggy. The emperor stayed in Ungshi city for a while, and first sent Gao Ji to lead the army east to test the waters. Zhao Qiuagong, Ashina and others were preparing to go on an expedition. By the way, they collected some food and grass here to appease the people. A few days later, news came that Gao Ji led 40,000 soldiers and horses all the way to the east, and even went down to 12 cities. 8 of them were surrendered directly after the arrival of people, and the remaining 4 were captured, but it didn't take much effort. Gao Ji is the second prince of Goguryeo. Most of the generals around him are prominent families in the country. Their in-laws are all over the whole of Goguryeo. If they lead troops to attack the city, where can they be fierce? Shuigui followed behind, and scattered the troops and horses all the way to defend the city. The news was sent back to Ungshi city. The emperor was overjoyed, and immediately asked Zhao Shangshu and Ashina to lead 2 armies eastward to join Gao Ji. He was protected by Yin Li and followed them with a large tent. Nisa also heard the news, and she was in poor health that day. He was groggy for a while, and Moun couldn't cry, so he invited Zhou Man over. Man Bao prescribed a new prescription after acupuncture. She paused for a while before handing the prescription to Moun and said in a low voice, "Prepare for the funeral." Moun was stunned for a moment, then he picked up his robe and knelt down, "Please save my father, Lord Zhou." Man Bao shook his head, "The patient doesn't want to live anymore, why should we embarrass him?" In the past few days, Man Bao watched Nisa begging for death while struggling to take medicine and needles. In fact, he felt uncomfortable. Although the doctor wants to cure diseases and save people, his heart is sour, and he is not at all uncomfortable. She said, "This medicine can make him walk more comfortable and refreshed." Man Bao said, "He has lost both qi and blood, and his internal organs have been exhausted. Now there is no way to do it." Moun burst into tears and could only plead, "Please also ask Master Zhou to stay here. If it is my father, please send Master Zhou to my father for a ride." Man Bao, she didn't give it away, is she rushing to be someone's father's enemy? Although the medicine she prescribed now is tiger wolf medicine, it still maintains his life and makes him feel better. It is not a medicine for killing people. Well, to a certain extent, it is also a medicine to send people to death. But Man Bao didn't immediately refuse, he just said, "I'll just sit here. If Nisa doesn't feel well, I might be able to give him an injection to relieve the pain, so that he can feel better in his last days." Moun took the prescription to grab the medicine. When the medicine was boiled and delivered, a snowflake actually floated in the gloomy sky outside. Man Bao, who was sitting under the porch, was stunned for a moment. He got up and walked out of the eaves. He raised his hand to pick up a little snow. Only then did he realize that snow was falling in the sky. Is this the first snow in Angshi city? In the room, Moun spent a lot of effort to persuade Nisa to take half a bowl of medicine. He seemed to feel something and pushed the bowl away to look outside. The window was closed because of the cold, and he couldn't see anything, but he still asked, I seem to hear the sound of snow. Moun was stunned for a moment, then quickly looked at the next person, who came out to take a look, and immediately said, Master, it's snowing. Nisa lifted the quilt. Quick, help me to have a look. Moun hurriedly took the thick coat on the servant's body and put it on his father, and helped him to the door. Nisa stepped out of the door and leaned against the door. Seeing the fluttering snow, tears slipped from the bottom of his eyes and fell to his mouth along the ravines on his face, bitterly. He slid down the door and sat on the ground, tearing constantly. This snow is not at the right time, it's not the right time. If it were 8 days in the morning, it would only be 8 days earlier, then. Moun nervously glanced at Joe Man, who was standing in the yard, and couldn't help but whispered, Father. Man Bao looked at him silently, seeing that the snow was getting bigger and bigger, and it was no longer snowing at all. He went back to the porch and patted the snowflakes on his head and shoulders. She and Nisa said, How can there be so much in this world, if... Nisa raised her tearful eyes to look at Joe Man, and simply leaned against the door and did not move. He said, Aren't the emperors of Jin taking in our princes? Aren't they afraid that they will turn against Jin in the future? Man Bao said, Jin country is strong, as long as the people are safe and Kuotai. There is a Koguryo in Mir, but it's just a few state capitals of our Jin country, and it's the other way around. Without the response of the world, they won't be able to achieve great things. And if the Jin state comes to the day when the people's grievances boil, there will not be many more old Koguryo royal families. What's more, with the emperor's previous style, he would not let the Gao royal family continue to rule on this land, and put it in Jiangnan or Lingnan. After 2 or 3 generations, who would care about the bitter cold land of Liaodong? Hearing this, Nisa burst out laughing, and crying again, shouting with tears, Yes, even a female imperial physician in the state of Jin knows the truth, but the king doesn't. The state of Jin has already passed the precarious wind and rain when it was first established. The court is united, and the ruler and the ministers are in harmony. At this time, there should be no provocation of the state of Jin, but the king will not listen. I must attack Yangzhou. Nisa burst into tears. Although Angshi city guards the gate of the inner city, it is in the hinterland, so although I disagree with this move, I still keep myself safe. I only know today that I made a mistake. Step by step wrong. There are no finished eggs under the nest, and Shishan was defeated by the hands of the king, and also by me, ahem. Nisa coughed, and her face flushed. Man Bao hurriedly stepped forward to give him a needle, but Nisa pushed her hand away and said stubbornly, Being able to see the first snow this year is the greatest gift from God. I dare not live any longer, and dare not live any longer. Already. He grabbed Moun's hand, got up with difficulty, walked down the corridor step by step, stretched out his hand to hold the falling snow. Tears fell drop by drop. Repent. I really regret it. Looking back on the past, they had many opportunities to defend the city of Angshi. If Yanshao did not rashly advance, and rushed into the canyon with an army of 150,000. If they can be a little more cautious and stick to the city gate. The second prince of the high school was more decisive and led the army to stand firm. When the snow fell, as long as the Jin army could not leave Angshi Chen, in the end Angshi Chen was lost, but Goguryeo was kept. Nisa clenched the snow in her hands and slowly fell down with infinite regret. Moun touched it and was shocked, Father. Man Bao immediately stepped forward to look, and shook his head slightly at him after a while. See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2754. The emperor was already preparing to open the camp. Hearing the news of Nisa's death, he sighed slightly and waved, "Bury the Mo family." After that, Guzhon picked some porcelain and jade to send to the Mo family. Gold and silver wares can be cashed out directly, and even if they are not as valuable as porcelain and jade, the emperor does not want to give them away. Manbao cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, I will retire first." The emperor waved his hand, and when she turned around, he stopped her again. "It's hard to march in the snow, so maybe your medical bills insist." Manbao said, "Since you have entered the army, you are a member of the army. Your Majesty doesn't need to treat us differently." The emperor nodded with satisfaction, and smiled. Yu Qing waits for the sentence. "I will feel at ease, even swallow, I can continue the eastward expedition." Yin Li strode forward, and after waiting for the report, he opened the curtain and came in. He bowed and replied, "Your Majesty, the 5th batch of food and grass has been delivered." The emperor's eyes brightened slightly, and after calculating the time, he said, "This time, they are acquainted with each other. Have you checked them all?" Yin Li said, "I have checked it all, and there are no major problems. Small problems are unavoidable." The emperor breathed a sigh of relief, now that he even had enough food and grass, and it was a pity not to take Goguryeo at this time and place. He laughed cheerfully and said, "Okay, I ordered to go down and pull out the camp tomorrow morning." Yes. With Gao Ji as the vanguard, the Jin army marched forward, and soon gathered in the domestic city. Because Gao Ji, Zhao Qiuagong, and Ashina cleared obstacles along the road, the main tent only had to go all the way east, and even the snow did not slow down their speed much, and the group quickly caught up. When Gao Ji arrived at the last small city in front of the inner city, the main tent was not far from them, only about 80 miles away, and they could reach it in a day. And this city has become the stronghold of Feng Shangshu. Because he didn't know about Gao Ji's surrender, he thought it was a reinforcement of Goguryeo and was planning to defend the city gate. As a result, he crouched on the city wall and looked at the flag. The more he looked, the more he looked like them. The banner of Jin, he seems to have read the big Jin character right. And Gao Ji didn't know that the city was occupied by the Jin army, and was planning to send someone to convince the city owner. As a result, the two sides were facing each other. He also felt that the flag on the opposite wall was not very similar to their Goguryeo. The two sides stared at each other, but Feng Shangshu didn't believe them and kept them out of the city until the leaders of Zhao Qiuagong and Ashina arrived, and then he let them in. As Gao Ji walked in, he thought, if Ashina pulled the city gate, if their city gate officer had such rules, the city of Ungshi would not be broken. When the emperor arrived in this small town and saw Feng Shangshu, he could hardly recognize him. Not only has the person lost a lot of weight, the beard is messy, and even the clothes are almost smelly. As soon as he saw the emperor, Feng Shangshu stepped forward and saluted excitedly, "Your Majesty, this minister finally sees you." He had planned to stay for a few days after the snow fell, and then he would withdraw from the sea without any news of the army. He went deep alone and slept with his eyes open. When I saw the emperor at this moment, I felt relieved when I was excited, and then I wanted to cry. The emperor was most distressed. He carefully looked at Feng Shangshu and the generals behind him. He was so distressed that he took their hands and said, "Thank you for your hard work." Their monarchs and ministers were in tears here, and not far from the side, Imperial Physician Zheng was also crying with Imperial Physician Lu. In fact, he wanted to drag Zhou Man. After all, she was the chief official, but there was a difference between men and women. So he could only cry in front of Zhou Man, pulling Imperial Physician Lu. It was really hard for him this time. Man Bao saw that he was all thin and out of shape, and that the students behind him had also changed greatly. He felt distressed for a while, and quickly asked, "Why are you doing this? Did Feng Shangshu deduct your military rations?" "Then there must be a military ration deduction." Zheng Tai wiped his tears and said, "We are not like your side, we are traveling by sea, and we are alone. Except for the supply of food and grass at the beginning, there will be no more food and grass after that. Can't get in." Man Bao nodded to show his understanding. After all, they had few people with them, and it was difficult to keep the path along the way. The food and grass sent in were basically to help the enemy, so it was better not to send it. "So we can only raise military supplies ourselves," Zheng Tai cried. It was not bad in the beginning. Feng Shangshu attacked the city very well, and he went to many cities along the way. Every time he conquered a city, he collected food from the warehouse in the city, and then some more. The wealthy people walk around and sit down at the house, and the rations will be available. But 25 days ago, Goguryeo started to be ruthless. Every time we captured a city, they would rather burn all the houses in the city and not give it to us before they retreated. The next few cities were severely damaged, but except for the one at the city gate, which they beat, the rest were the troops of Goguryeo, who were extremely ruthless. Before Feng Shangshu, in order not to let the Goguryeo people cut their own way, he has always been friendly to ordinary people, and has always restricted the army not to disturb the people. They can gather food and grass without disturbing the people, so their relationship is not bad. But after the Goguryeo people behave like this, it will be difficult for them to maintain a good relationship with ordinary Goguryeo people. Between Goguryeo and his own soldiers, Feng Liang chose his own soldiers without blinking, so he directly asked people to collect food and grass, and they robbed them if they could not collect them. However, the inner city is strong, and most of the remaining soldiers and horses of Goguryeo are in the inner city. Of course, Feng Liang alone cannot defeat them. So he could only turn around and grab this small town as a stronghold. It's just that it's difficult. The city is so big. When the officials evacuated before, they took away what they could take away, and set fire to those who couldn't take it away. Not even a few Goguryeo people were left in the city. They can only collect food and grass, occasionally go to nearby villages and towns to grab a wave, while besieging the inner city. Because of the shortage of food, everyone eats 2 meals a day, and each meal is still thin, but the amount of exercise is large, and if you come and go, everyone will lose weight. Both Man Bao and Imperial Physician Lu looked at him sympathetically, especially Imperial Physician Lu. Zhou Man still needed to go to the battlefield, and he was the one who stayed by the Emperor's side most of the time, and was the most relaxed of the three. Imperial Physician Zheng suffered the most. Man Bao comforted Imperial Doctor Zheng and promised, "I'll treat you to steamed buns tonight." Imperial Physician Zheng cried for a while, then raised his head and asked, "Is it true?" Man Bao nodded. Seeing that the students behind Imperial Physician Zheng were also swallowing, they said, "Come together." They nodded immediately, almost knocking their heads off. The arrival of the army gave Feng Shangshu enough food and grass along the way. As soon as the two armies converged, they began to cook rice. The aroma of food wafted everywhere in and out of the small town. "Look around." When Feng Shangshu saw it, he said, "Your Majesty, these people who are left behind are poor people who cannot escape. The ministers scavenged some food and grass from them before, and now it is snowing. If there is no food relief, they may not survive this spring. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2755. Chapter 2694 Flickering. The Emperor frowned slightly and asked, "What's going on in the inner city?" He asked, "Is there any news about the batch?" Feng Shangshu, "The last time we contacted was 9 days ago, and there has been no news since then." The Emperor counted the time. 9 days ago, it was just a few days after Gao Ji went to the 8 cities. At that time, Gao's royal court should have received the news that Gao Ji surrendered with Chang, right? After pondering for a moment, the emperor summoned Bai Shan, draft a national letter, and let the king of Goguryeo come to see me. If you don't want to negotiate, then return my envoys. Bai Shan complied and retreated. After a while, he prepared the national letter and presented it. The emperor read it, nodded slightly, changed a few words, and handed it over to Bai Shan. I will transcribe it immediately, and the author will send it now. This small town is also a domestic city. It is only the size of a county. It is not very far from the domestic city. It is more than 30 miles away, and the fast horse will arrive soon. Bai Shan wrote it and took it to the emperor to read and stamp it. Then he took the stamped national letter and went to the servant in the province. After they agreed, he copied it and kept it on file, and then handed it over to the minister. Yin Li, the commander of the Forbidden Army, sent someone to send it to the inner city. At this time, Zhang Hui was squatting in Goguryeu's heavenly prison and sighing. He was arrested 7 days ago. Before he was arrested, he wanted to send a message to Feng Shangshu outside the city, but the people who sent him were arrested. The line that was said to be very safe was also cut off, and none of the operators were caught. The fifth prince of Gao lived in the ward next to him, and was a little stunned at this time. Both of them have disheveled hair and unshaven beards, but this is only an appearance, and there is still an essential difference between them. After all, the fifth prince of Goguryeo was the prince of Goguryeo, and he was favored before, and his mother was still there, so he lived in a cell with not only clean quilts, but also tables, chairs, and benches, not only hot tea and hot water, but also snacks. There was also a stove in the corner of the supposedly dark and damp sky prison. In contrast, Zhang Hui next door lived in the real prison. The quilt was a hard and smelly quilt, not to mention the tables and chairs. He had to use thatch to make the bed so it wouldn't be too cold. I was not very lucky. When I was caught, all the gold, silver, and jewelry that were not sent out were seized, and the only good things left on my body were also scoured when I was in prison. So he can only live a miserable life. Zhang Hui was forced, and the fifth prince was frightened, unable to eat or swallow, unable to sleep, and took the initiative to live a hard life. The two of them don't know who is more sad. Zhang Hui has been appeasing the fifth prince in the past few days, just to avoid his mutiny. However, he also heard what the soldiers reported at the time. The Jin army had already captured Ungshi city, and even the second high school prince had surrendered, and even brought the vanguard army to the 8 cities. Goguryeu's demise is imminent, and the final result of the rebellion of the fifth prince of Goguryeo at this time will not be good. It is better to follow him all the way to the dark. Prince Gao Wu of course knew this, but he was also afraid. He was afraid that before the Jin army invaded the inner city, his father would cut him off. So he was terrified these days. The two squatted in the cell and sighed together. Zhang Hui sighed that his life was sad, and the fifth prince sighed for his own life. He moved under a wall and spoke to the badge next door through the wall, Master Zhang, when will your majesty reach the inner city? Zhang Hui said, it's snowing outside, and the marching speed will definitely be slow. The prince doesn't have to worry. With the second prince's current siege speed, he should be able to reach the city in a few days. Across a wall, Zhang Hui couldn't see Gao Yu's state, but he could hear the fear in his voice. You said, will my father kill me? Zhang Hui complained in his heart that if he were to die, he would definitely commit suicide. It would be okay to take this unfilial son away before committing suicide. But he definitely couldn't tell Jiao like this, so he said softly, no, tiger poison doesn't eat offspring, not to mention the king of Goguryeo is not vicious, and he has always been good to his highness, plus your mother clan reconciles, he is sure I don't want to kill you. He added, You are also doing this for the sake of the king and the royal court. Zhang Hui persuaded, Our Majesty has so many cities in a row, and we are about to break through Goguryeo. Your Majesty can't resist to the end. Although Our Majesty is kind, it is not that he has no temper at all. After the matter is over, the fifth prince can use the credit he has made to intercede with your Majesty. This is your filial piety. Zhang Hui's face was moved, and his voice was full of moving, the world loves fame, and the prince is willing to take this notoriety for the safety of the king. Isn't this great filial piety? The fifth prince was taken aback for a moment. Yes, he surrendered to Dejin not because I lived alone, but also because of my father. When the Emperor of Jin calls over, he can intercede with the Emperor of Jin and let him spare his father's life. Isn't this filial piety? The fifth prince was moved by himself, so he became more and more determined. When he was brought up to see the king in the palace, he knelt on the ground and cried, and said to his father, Father, it is for you, and my son will not listen to you. And then stand on the side of Goguryeo. The king of Goguryeo was so angry that he picked up the teacup and smashed it. They gave you some ecstasy, and they were able to hook your spirit away. What do you mean by me? You are obviously greedy for life and afraid of death. There were not many sons of the king of Goguryeo, and only a few were favored. As a result, 2 of them voted for Jin. There are already rumors outside that their royal court of the Gao family is tyrannical and vicious. This dark is naturally his Gao family's royal court, and the bright is the Jin state. Pissed him off. The fifth prince had just finished moving himself in the prison and was not very afraid of King Goguryeo. He said, Have you ever thought about what will happen to the inner city if the inner city can't stand it? The king of Goguryeo twitched his cheeks. The fifth prince did not know that the army of Dajin had arrived outside the city, but the king of Goguryeo knew that even he received the letter of credentials. So at this time, the sharp sword on the neck has fallen to the neck, clinging to the flesh, just waiting for it to be cut off accidentally, and the head will fall directly. The fifth prince said, Father, my son wants you to live, I want you to live. If, can't stand it, the royal court is broken, the son can exchange all the credit for the father to survive. The emperor of the Jin dynasty is still benevolent. Urchin pleads for mercy, maybe it will work. When the king of Goguryeo heard this reason, he ran over and gave him a kick in anger. Idiot, do you need to surrender and do meritorious deeds to plead for mercy? You are greedy for life and fear death, and you put the reason on my head. Your Majesty. The chamberlain quickly grabbed the king of Goguryeo. The king of Goguryeo kicked the fifth prince several times, kicked everyone and vomited blood before exhaling, pointing at him and scolding, Drag him down, drag him down. Originally, I wanted to discuss with him how to deal with the batch. It was best to bribe the envoy to do something, but seeing that he was so stupid and fooled by the batch, he immediately had no desire to continue with him. That's all, why go through him, just look for the batch. He wanted high officials and riches, beauties and golden utensils. Whatever the Emperor Jin could give him, he could give them double. See you at 9.